I always saw myself as the reliable one, the guy who worked hard, paid his bills on time, and never left a friend stranded. That was me, Michael Morris, a 38-year-old software engineer, the kind of guy who believed in loyalty and commitment. I was married to Gloria for nearly a decade, and up until a few months ago, I thought we had it all. Maybe not perfect, but solid enough. Our life was comfortable, a nice house in a quiet suburb, a joint savings account that was finally looking respectable, no kids to worry about, but a dog named Rocky who could brighten even the darkest days with his boundless energy. I thought we were happy. I thought I was happy. Gloria worked in real estate. She had a way with people, could talk to anyone, and make them feel like they were the only person in the room. Her clients adored her, and I admired her for it. She knew how to use her looks too: tight skirts, perfectly styled hair, makeup always just right. She'd flash that brilliant smile, the one that could light up any room, and men would fall over themselves to please her. I used to feel lucky, watching the way she could command a room with just a glance, feeling pride that she was mine. But recently, that charm of hers started to feel more like a weapon aimed at me than a gift. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, I barely noticed the changes. She'd get home later and later, always with an excuse. "Showing a house ran over," she'd say, or "client wanted to discuss some things over dinner." Reasonable explanations, nothing too suspicious. But there was something different in her tone, a certain distance in her eyes when she spoke. She was always checking her phone, a constant fixture in her hand. It never left her side anymore, not during meals, not even when we sat together to watch TV. Her thumb scrolling endlessly, her face lit up by that cold blue glow. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just dealing with work stress. The market was tough, and real estate could be a brutal business. But then, she started taking extra care with her appearance, even on days when she had no scheduled showings. New clothes kept appearing in our closet, designer dresses, high-end shoes I didn't remember her buying. I noticed new perfumes on her dresser, ones I had never smelled before. When I asked about them, she just laughed it off. "Just trying something new," she'd say, with that dismissive wave of her hand. At night, she would stay up late, her face illuminated by her phone screen, giggling softly to herself. If I asked her what was so funny, she'd mumble something about a group chat with friends or a new meme she saw online. But she never showed me the screen. It was always turned just slightly away from me, just out of my sight. Then came the little lies, the ones so subtle they barely registered at first. "I'm heading out for a client dinner," she'd tell me, only to come back smelling of smoke, a scent she loathed and never allowed in our house. Or she'd mention going for drinks with her colleagues and return much later than she said she would, with a smile that seemed more forced than genuine, her eyes darting away from mine. I started feeling like a detective in my own home, piecing together clues that didn't quite add up. I would hear her on the phone, her voice hushed, murmuring into the receiver, her laughter sounding too sweet, too careful. "Oh, stop it! You're terrible," she'd whisper, her voice carrying a playful lilt I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. When I asked who it was, she would shrug and say, "Just a colleague from work," but she never mentioned a name, and I never pressed her. I was afraid of what I might discover. The first real crack came on a Sunday. Gloria was supposed to be meeting a client, but something felt off. I don't know what it was. A shift in her demeanor, a flicker of guilt in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. I decided to do some cleaning in the garage to take my mind off it. As I was sorting through the clutter, I found a receipt crumpled in the glove compartment of her car. Dinner for two at a high-end restaurant downtown on a night she had claimed she was working late. My hands started to shake as I stared at that piece of paper, the ink staring back at me like a challenge. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a business dinner. But why hadn't she mentioned it? Why lie about something so insignificant? I grabbed my phone, my heart pounding, and dialed the number on the receipt, pretending to be a client looking to make a reservation. The hostess confirmed it. A reservation under Gloria's name for 2 people on that night. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. That's when the doubts that had been creeping in turned into something darker, something more visceral. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I knew then, in that moment, that I had to find out the truth. Whatever it took, I had to know. But little did I realize how deep this rabbit hole would go, and just how much my life was about to change. I tried to brush it off, to convince myself that everything was fine, that Gloria was just having a rough patch at work. But each day, there were more signs that made me uneasy. I could feel something slipping between us, something intangible yet undeniable. She began to drift away from our conversations, her responses shorter, less interested. Her gaze would wander, and sometimes I'd catch her staring off into the distance, her lips curled into a faint smile like she was thinking of something, or someone, else. I decided I needed to pay closer attention. I started noticing the little things, like the way her phone never seemed to leave her hand. She used to toss it onto the kitchen counter when she got home, but now she kept it close, even when she was just running to the bathroom or stepping out for a minute. One night, I saw her typing frantically on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. When she noticed me looking, she turned her back, angling the screen away from my view. "Who's that?" I asked casually, trying to sound disinterested. "Just work stuff," she replied, a little too quickly, not looking up. Her voice had that sharp edge, the kind that made my stomach knot up. "Working late again?" I pressed, trying to keep my tone light. She just shrugged. "Yeah, new clients being a pain. You know how it is." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, just for a second, then back to her phone. But in that brief moment, I saw something there. Something that wasn't right. It was like she was daring me to dig deeper, to ask more. But I didn't. Not yet. A few nights later, Gloria came home well past midnight, the sound of her car in the driveway breaking the heavy silence in our house. I had been sitting in the dark, pretending to watch TV, waiting. When she walked through the door, she looked surprised to see me awake. "Late night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated for just a moment, then flashed that smile, the one that usually worked on her clients. "Sorry, babe. Lost track of time with the team," she said, hanging her coat. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I got up and moved closer, catching a faint whiff of something unfamiliar. Cologne, not hers, not mine. It was subtle, almost masked by her own perfume, but it was there, lingering. "You smell different," I said, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. She paused, just a beat too long, then laughed it off. "Oh, yeah, new perfume. One of the girls at work gave me a sample to try. You like it?" I nodded, though my gut was screaming at me. I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure." Over the next week, things got stranger. Gloria would leave earlier and come back later. She would smile and act like everything was fine, but there was a tension in the air, something she couldn't hide. One night, I watched her get ready for one of these supposed client dinners. She stood in front of the mirror, fussing with her hair more than usual, her makeup just a little too perfect for a work meeting. "Another late one?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. She didn't turn around. "Yeah, sorry. It's been crazy busy." I watched her reflection closely, the way she glanced at her phone one last time before slipping it into her purse. "You've been working a lot lately," I said, trying to keep it light, even though I felt the tightness in my chest. "Gotta make the sales, Michael. You know how it is," she replied, her tone breezy, almost dismissive. I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. "Yeah, I know how it is," I murmured, watching as she turned, kissed me on the cheek, and walked out the door. After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling. I grabbed my own jacket and decided to follow her. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I needed to see for myself that I was wrong. I waited a few minutes, then drove out, keeping a safe distance from her car. She took a turn into the city, away from where her usual client meetings would be. I tailed her carefully, trying to stay out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest. After about 20 minutes, she pulled into the parking lot of a bar I knew all too well. It wasn't a place for work dinners. It was a place for something else. I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they ached. I watched as she stepped out of her car, straightening her dress, checking her reflection in the car window. I saw a man approach her, tall, dark hair, dressed too casually to be a client. He greeted her with a smile and she laughed, touching his arm in that familiar, flirty way I hadn't seen in years. My chest tightened as I watched them, every nerve in my body screaming at me to confront her, to demand answers. But I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling my breath come in short, angry bursts. I watched them disappear into the bar together. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, my vision narrowing. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, fighting the urge to storm in, to grab her, to make a scene. But I knew I needed more than this, more than just the sight of her walking into a bar with another man. I needed proof. I started the car, my hands shaking, and drove home, my mind racing with questions and doubts. I needed a plan. I needed to find out what was really going on. I wasn't going to let this go, not until I had the truth. The next morning I woke up with a single-minded determination. I couldn't keep playing this game of half-truths and suspicions. I needed to know exactly what was happening. I decided to call in sick at work. I had more important things to handle. After Gloria left for her usual morning meetings, I went straight to her laptop. She had always been careful with her phone, but she rarely bothered to log out of her email on the computer. I felt my heart racing as I opened her browser. My hands were shaking, but I kept going. I clicked on her email and typed in the password she'd used for years, our wedding date. It worked. I was in. For a moment, I stared at the screen, almost too afraid to look, but I forced myself to start scrolling through her messages. Most were boring, work emails, a few from friends, but then I found it. A name I didn't recognize, Brad Carter. I opened the first message, dated a few weeks back. My stomach clenched as I read. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again?" I felt my breath catch in my throat. I kept scrolling, finding more of the same, dozens of messages, some recent, others older, all filled with flirtatious banter, innuendos, and outright confessions of intimacy. There were even pictures, selfies of Gloria smiling at him, dressed in clothes I didn't recognize, looking younger, more vibrant, more alive. I slammed the laptop shut, feeling a surge of anger so intense I could barely breathe. My mind was spinning. I needed to see this for myself. I grabbed my phone and made a call to a friend who owed me a favor, Mike, a private investigator. Within hours, Mike had set up surveillance on Gloria, cameras, trackers, the works. I told him I wanted a full report, pictures, videos, everything. That evening, Gloria came home like nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and started cooking dinner. Her laugh was easy, her movements relaxed. I felt sick just watching her, knowing what I knew now. I played along, acting normal, chatting about trivial things, but inside, I was boiling over with rage. A few days later, Mike called. "Michael, you're gonna want to see this," he said, his voice low. He sent over a file, and I clicked it open immediately. There it was, clear as day, photos of Gloria, meeting Brad in parking lots, sneaking into hotels, slipping into his car. Each image hit me like a punch to the gut. They looked too comfortable together, too familiar. The way she smiled at him, it was the same smile she used to give me. Mike had also recorded some audio. I hesitated, then pressed play. I heard her voice, soft and laughing, mixed with Brad's deeper tone. Their words cut through me like a knife. "I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore," Gloria said, her voice light and happy. "I hate lying to him, but I love being with you." I turned the audio off, my hand trembling. That was it. The proof I needed. Undeniable, irrefutable. I knew what I had to do next. That night, I waited. Gloria said she was going out to meet clients again. I pretended to be asleep, but the moment she left, I jumped up, threw on some clothes, and grabbed the spare key to her car. I had installed a GPS tracker on it the day before. I watched the blinking dot on my phone, saw her heading downtown. I knew where she was going. I decided to beat her to it. I drove like a madman, weaving through traffic, the streetlights blurring past. I pulled into the parking lot of a small, dingy motel just in time to see her car pull up. I parked out of sight and watched. She stepped out, looking around like a thief, before slipping inside. I waited a moment, then followed. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, my heart thundering in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to see it with my own eyes. I crept up to the room, my steps silent on the cracked pavement. I heard voices inside, muffled laughter, whispers. I moved closer, pressing my ear against the door. My blood was boiling, every muscle in my body tense. I could barely breathe as I listened. Then, I heard it. Her voice and his mingling in a low murmur. I didn't wait any longer. I pounded on the door with a force that made the wood shake. The laughter inside stopped. I heard frantic movements, then Gloria's voice, strained. "Who is it?" I didn't answer. I just kept pounding until the door finally flew open, and there she was, Gloria, standing in her underwear, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Behind her, Brad was struggling to pull on his pants. "Michael, what are you—" I didn't let her finish. "You think I'm a fool, Gloria? You think I wouldn't find out?" My voice was louder than I intended, filled with all the anger and betrayal that had been boiling inside me for weeks. Brad stepped forward, his expression turning hard. "You need to leave, man," he said, his voice deep and calm, but there was a threat in his tone. I lunged at him, shoving him back against the wall. "You bastard!" I shouted. "You come into my house, into my marriage." But Brad was stronger than he looked. He pushed back hard, sending me stumbling. I reached for the baseball bat I'd grabbed from my car, swinging wildly. "Take it, you bastard!" I yelled, my voice ragged with fury. But Brad was quicker. He dodged the swing, grabbing the bat from my hands, and before I could react, he slammed it into my stomach. Pain exploded through my body as I doubled over, gasping for breath. He stood over me, his face twisted with contempt. "Listen, cuckold," he spat. "I'm going to come here every day and sleep with her. And if you try to harm me again, I will kill you. Your wife will get insurance, and you'll be gone. Understand?" I lay there on the cold floor, gasping, every breath a struggle. I looked up at Gloria, searching for some sign of regret, some flicker of guilt. But she just stood there, her face a mask of fear and confusion. The betrayal wasn't just in her words or in her actions, but in the emptiness of her gaze, the way she looked right through me as if I was nothing. Nothing at all. I lay on the cold, dirty motel floor for what felt like an eternity, trying to catch my breath as Brad hovered over me with that damned bat in his hand. Every inch of my body ached from the blow, but the pain in my chest was sharper, deeper. I clutched my side, my vision blurring with a mix of rage and humiliation. Gloria stood there in her underwear, her eyes wide and frantic, darting between Brad and me. I could see the panic rising in her, but she didn't say a word. I waited for her to do something, to scream, to cry, to show even a flicker of guilt or shame. But she did nothing. Just stared at me like I was some wounded animal that had wandered in from the street. Brad, still gripping the bat, slowly lowered it, his face settling into a calm sneer. "You need to get out of here, Michael," he said coldly, "before I decide to finish this." I struggled to get up, forcing myself to stand. I wasn't going to stay there on the floor like some beaten dog. My hands were trembling, and I could taste blood in my mouth. I looked at Gloria one last time, hoping for something, anything, but her face remained stony, her lips pressed tightly together. "Gloria," I said, my voice hoarse and raw, "is this what you want?" She glanced at Brad, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, she just whispered, "Just go, Michael. Please, just go." Those words stung worse than the hit to my gut. I staggered back a step, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. Brad smirked, clearly enjoying the scene. "Good choice," he muttered, stepping aside to let me pass. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to walk out the door without another word. I stumbled outside into the cool night air, my mind racing. I leaned against the hood of my car, breathing heavily, trying to steady myself. I could hear them behind me, Brad's low voice, Gloria's softer one, muffled, indistinguishable, but still filled with that terrible intimacy that cut me to the core. I felt like my world was collapsing around me, each second ticking by like a death knell. But I couldn't stay there. Not in that parking lot. Not with them. I needed a plan. I needed to clear my head, figure out my next move. I climbed into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I drove away, my foot heavy on the gas, the tires screeching as I pulled out of the lot. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring together as I pushed through the streets. I ended up at a dive bar on the outskirts of town, one of those places where no one asks questions and the whiskey flows cheap. I parked and sat there for a minute, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked haggard, older somehow. There was a bruise forming along my jaw where Brad had hit me, a dark bloom spreading across my skin. I finally got out of the car and headed inside. The bar was dimly lit, filled with the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke. A few patrons sat hunched over their drinks, and a tired-looking bartender wiped down glasses behind the counter. I slid onto a stool and ordered a double whiskey, downing it in one gulp before asking for another. I sat there, replaying everything in my mind over and over. I kept seeing Gloria's face, the way she looked at Brad, the way she didn't even try to defend herself. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting deeper with every thought. I wanted to hit something, to break something, to do anything that would dull the pain in my chest. But all I could do was sit there and drink, trying to numb myself as the whiskey burned its way down my throat. The bartender gave me a sympathetic nod. "Rough night?" he asked, pouring me another. I chuckled darkly. "You could say that." He didn't pry, and I was grateful for it. I sat there for hours, nursing my drink, staring into the amber liquid like it held some answer I couldn't find. I thought about calling someone. Mike, maybe, or one of the few friends I still had. But what could I say? How could I even begin to explain this? As the hours passed, the bar started to empty. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I paid my tab and stumbled back out into the night. The air was cold and sharp, sobering me up just a little. I stood by my car, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. I couldn't just go home. I couldn't face the empty house, the bed that still smelled like Gloria's perfume. I needed somewhere to go, someone to talk to. Without thinking, I dialed Mike's number. He answered on the second ring. "Michael?" He sounded alert, concerned. "Yeah," I croaked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I need a place to crash for the night." "Come over," he said immediately. "I'll make some coffee. We'll talk." I hung up and got back in the car, driving through the silent streets. As I pulled up to Mike's house, I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me like a truck. I dragged myself to his front door, and he opened it before I could even knock. He took one look at me, and I could see the questions in his eyes, but he just nodded and stepped aside to let me in. "Sit down," he said softly, gesturing to the couch. "You look like hell." I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. I felt like I might break apart, shatter into a million pieces right there in his living room. Mike didn't press me, just poured us both a cup of strong black coffee and sat down across from me. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. And so I did. I told him about the emails, the pictures, the motel, the bat, everything. He listened, not interrupting, his face a mask of concern and quiet anger. When I finished, he leaned back, his brow furrowed. "You can't let this slide, Michael," he said finally. "You have to do something. You can't let him threaten you like that, and you definitely can't let her get away with this." "I know," I muttered, staring down into my coffee. "But what the hell am I supposed to do?" Mike leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "First, you protect yourself. Whatever happens next, you make sure you come out on top, no matter what it takes." I nodded slowly, feeling a spark of determination ignite somewhere deep within me. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. This was far from over. The next morning, I woke up on Mike's couch, my head pounding, a dull ache in my stomach where the bat had hit me. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind like a bad movie. I pushed myself up, wincing at the stiffness in my ribs. Mike was already awake, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his laptop open. He looked up as I staggered in. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I muttered, reaching for the pot of coffee and pouring myself a cup. I felt like I hadn't slept in weeks. Every muscle in my body was sore, every thought sharp and jagged. "I can't stay here forever, Mike. I need a plan." He nodded slowly, shutting his laptop. "You're right. We can't just let them get away with this. We need to turn the tables on them, make them realize they've messed with the wrong guy." He leaned in, a spark of determination in his eyes. "But we have to be smart about it." I took a sip of the coffee, feeling the bitter warmth spread through me. "What do you have in mind?" Mike leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "First, we need more information. Brad seems confident, too confident. He wouldn't just threaten you like that unless he had something up his sleeve. We need to know what he's planning, what he's after. And as for Gloria, she's still your wife, at least legally. That gives you certain rights, certain leverage." I nodded, the gears in my mind starting to turn. "You think I should confront her?" "Not yet," Mike replied quickly. "We need to know more before we tip our hand. You're still living in that house. Use that to your advantage. Start watching her, track her movements, get whatever information you can, and don't let her know you're onto her. Let her think she's won." I knew Mike was right. I needed to be patient, strategic. "What about Brad?" I asked. "He won't just sit back and do nothing." Mike's eyes darkened. "Leave Brad to me," he said with a small smile. "I have some contacts, people who know how to handle guys like him. He won't know what hit him." A plan started to form in my mind, each piece clicking into place. I felt a new surge of energy, a fire I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me, not without a fight. For the next few days, I played the role of the clueless husband. I kept my distance, acting like everything was normal, pretending I was still reeling from the shock of that night. Gloria seemed relieved, almost relaxed, as if my silence meant I had given up. She didn't realize I was watching her every move. I began tracking her routine, noting the times she left, the places she went. I put a small GPS tracker on her car, synced to an app on my phone. Every time she left the house, I'd watch that little dot on my screen, seeing where she went, how long she stayed. I followed her once or twice, always keeping a safe distance, always careful not to be seen. Most of the time, it was mundane. grocery shopping, gym, work. But a few times, she'd slip away to meet Brad. I'd watch from a distance, my blood boiling, but I kept my cool. I needed more than just my suspicions. One night, while Gloria was in the shower, I crept into the bedroom. I knew she had a habit of hiding things in her vanity drawer. Letters, receipts, little secrets she thought I never noticed. I opened the drawer, moving slowly, quietly. My fingers brushed against something thin like paper. I pulled it out, a folded piece of stationery with a name I didn't recognize, Brad Carter. There was an address scrawled beneath it, along with a date, a few days from now. My heart raced. It looked like an invitation, a meeting set up at a location I didn't know. I memorized the address, carefully placing the note back where I found it, and closed the drawer. Gloria's humming drifted from the bathroom, and I quickly stepped away, moving to the window and pretending to adjust the blinds. When she came out of the shower, I smiled at her, keeping my face calm, my tone casual. "You're going out tonight?" She glanced at me, surprised. "No, not tonight. Just need some rest. It's been a long week." Her eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt or just annoyance at the question? I couldn't tell, but I kept my expression neutral. "All right, just thought I'd ask," I replied, turning away. Inside, I felt a rush of anticipation. Whatever was going on, I was getting closer to the truth. The day of the meeting came, and I was ready. I drove to the address early, parking a few blocks away. I waited, watching as cars came and went, scanning the faces of each driver, looking for a hint of recognition. Finally, Gloria's car pulled up. She parked and got out, dressed in a sleek black dress I hadn't seen before, her hair styled perfectly, looking every bit like she was on her way to some high-profile event. She looked around, then walked inside the building. I waited a few minutes before following. The address led to a small office building, nondescript, with tinted windows. I could hear the sound of distant voices through the walls. I moved closer, pressing myself against the door, trying to listen. I heard Brad's voice, low and calm, then Gloria's, a bit louder, a bit more insistent. "Are you sure this is safe?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of worry. "Don't worry," Brad replied smoothly. "Michael's not going to be a problem. He doesn't have the guts to do anything." I felt my hands curl into fists. I wanted to burst through the door, to confront them both, but I held myself back. I needed to hear more. Gloria's voice softened, almost pleading. I need to be sure. He's been so quiet lately. It's unsettling. I thought he'd blow up, do something crazy, but he's just quiet." Brad chuckled. "That's good. That means he's given up. We're in the clear." I'd heard enough. I stepped back, my heart racing, a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't going to wait any longer. It was time to confront them, on my terms, in my way. I walked back to my car, feeling a cold resolve settle in my bones. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I was going to take them down, both of them, and I wasn't going to make it easy. The day after I overheard Gloria and Brad, I felt a new surge of energy course through my veins. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to make their next move. I was done playing defense. This time I was going to take the fight to them. I spent the next few hours preparing, calling in favors from a few friends who had their own grievances with Brad. I needed to create a situation where he would feel cornered, vulnerable, and exposed. I wanted him to know I wasn't going to be an easy target. I wanted him to feel the pressure, to start making mistakes. That afternoon, I called Brad from a burner phone I'd picked up at a convenience store. I kept my voice calm, steady, like I was reading the morning news. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 9th Street tonight," I said. "We need to talk. Just the two of us. No surprises, no games." Brad hesitated on the other end. I could almost hear his brain working, weighing his options. "Why would I do that?" he finally asked, his tone skeptical. "Because if you don't, I'll send everything I have on you and Gloria to your wife, your business partners, and the police, I replied, my voice sharp and clear. You've got a lot more to lose than I do, Brad. Meet me, or I'll make your life a living hell. There was a pause, and I could hear him grinding his teeth. All right, Michael, he said slowly, trying to keep his cool. Tonight at 10. But if you try anything, You won't get the chance. I cut him off and hung up, a grim smile spreading across my face. I wasn't afraid of Brad anymore. I was done being afraid. I arrived at the warehouse an hour early to scope out the place. It was an old, abandoned building, the kind where no one would hear a thing if something went wrong. The perfect spot. I walked around the perimeter, checking for exits, making sure there was only one way in and out. I wanted Brad to feel trapped, to know that he had no escape once he stepped inside. I waited in the shadows, my eyes on the entrance, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant hum of traffic, the rustling of the wind. At exactly 10 p.m., I saw headlights approaching. Brad's car pulled up and he stepped out, looking around cautiously. He was wearing a leather jacket, his face tense, his eyes scanning the darkness. I watched him for a moment, then stepped out of the shadows. Brad, I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. He spun around, startled, his eyes narrowing when he saw me. He walked closer, trying to appear confident, but I could see the uncertainty in his step. You've got some nerve, Michael, he said, stopping a few feet away. What do you want? I want you to stay the hell away from my wife, I replied calmly. And I want you to know that I'm not afraid of you. He chuckled, shaking his head. You think you can scare me, Michael? You're nothing. You're just a pathetic loser who… Before he could finish, I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him against the wall. He grunted, surprised by the force of my attack, and tried to push me off. But I held firm, pressing him harder against the cold brick, my face inches from his. You listen to me, you piece of shit, I hissed. I've got nothing left to lose. You've taken everything from me. But I'm not going to let you get away with it. Brad smirked, trying to maintain his bravado, but I saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. You think you're tough, huh? You're just a coward who… I cut him off again, this time throwing a punch to his gut. He doubled over, gasping for air. I grabbed his head and pulled him back up, slamming him against the wall again. You think you can just walk into my life and take what you want? I snarled. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you? Brad spat on the ground, his breathing heavy. You're making a big mistake, Michael, he muttered. You don't know who you're dealing with. I leaned in closer, my voice low and menacing. Neither do you. He tried to push me off again, but I was ready this time. I twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. You're going to tell me everything, I demanded, my grip tightening. Why Gloria? Why my wife? Brad grunted, struggling against my hold. It wasn't just about her, he said, wincing. It was about you, too. You've got connections, and I needed access. She was just… a bonus. I felt my anger surge, my hands trembling with the force of it. You used her? I spat, my voice barely a whisper. You used her to get to me? Brad laughed, even as he winced in pain. She was easy. She wanted more money, more excitement. You were just a stepping stone, Michael. I felt my grip tighten on his arm, my knuckles white. I wanted to break him, to make him pay for every word. But I forced myself to calm down. I needed more information. I needed him to talk. What's the plan? I demanded. What were you and Gloria planning? He hesitated, his face twisting in a grimace. She thinks we're running away together, he muttered. She's a fool. I'm using her as much as I used you. I just wanted to get close to you, get what I needed, and disappear. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. And she doesn't know? He shook his head, a cruel smile spreading across his face. She's clueless. She thinks it's love, thinks I'm her ticket out. But once I've got what I want, I'm gone. I stepped back, releasing him. He stumbled, clutching his arm, his face contorted in pain. "You're a bastard," I said quietly, "but you've just given me exactly what I needed." Before he could react, I pulled out my phone, pressing the record button. "Say it again, Brad. For the camera. Tell me what you just told me." His eyes widened in shock. He hadn't realized I was recording. He lunged at me, trying to grab the phone, but I dodged to the side, keeping it just out of reach. "You son of a—" he started, but I cut him off with a swift kick to his knee, sending him crumpling to the ground. "Say it!" I yelled, holding the phone in his face. "Tell me the truth, or I swear I'll make sure you never walk again." He stared up at me, his expression a mix of fury and fear. He knew he was cornered, that he had no way out. And I knew, in that moment, that I had him right where I wanted him. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "I'll make you pay for this." I smirked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Oh, it's over, Brad. It's just over for you." I walked away from the warehouse with my heart pounding, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I had what I needed, a recording of Brad's confession, his arrogant sneer captured forever on my phone. I could use this to my advantage, turn the tables on both him and Gloria. But I knew this was just the beginning. There was still more to do. I needed to keep my next steps quiet and calculated. I couldn't risk Brad making a move before I had everything lined up. I headed back to Mike's place, driving with a fierce focus, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When I got there, I found Mike waiting outside, leaning against the porch railing, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He straightened up when he saw me, his expression tense. "How'd it go?" he asked, flicking the cigarette away. "I got him to talk," I said, holding up my phone. "Got it all on tape. He was using Gloria to get close to me. He thinks he's smarter than both of us." Mike nodded slowly, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Good. That gives us leverage. But we have to be smart. Brad's dangerous when he's cornered." I sat down on the steps, the weight of everything settling in. We need to hit him where it hurts. His reputation, his connections. We need to expose him. Mike chuckled softly, crossing his arms. "I know a few people who would love to hear about Brad's dirty little secrets, but we need to be careful how we play this. He's got friends in high places, and if he gets wind of what we're doing—" "He won't," I cut in. "Not until it's too late." Mike nodded, thinking. "All right, let's start with his business partners. If we can shake them, we can start to isolate him, make him vulnerable. And Gloria, what about her?" I paused for a moment, feeling the sting of betrayal once again. "I need to handle Gloria in my own way," I said quietly. "But I'll need your help." Mike raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. "We need to make her think that Brad's betrayed her, that he's been lying all along. We plant the seed of doubt, make her paranoid, then we use that to our advantage." Mike grinned, clearly liking the plan. "You're getting the hang of this, Michael. All right, let's start making some calls. I've got a few contacts who owe me favors. We'll spread the word, let them know Brad's been double-dealing." The next day, I began putting the plan into motion. I knew Gloria's routine, knew exactly where she'd be and when. That afternoon, I went to her favorite cafe, the one she liked to visit after her yoga class. I waited outside, my hands shoved into my pockets, trying to appear casual, like I was just out for a stroll. Soon enough, I saw her walking toward the cafe, her yoga mat slung over her shoulder, her face flushed from her workout. I stepped out of the shadows and called her name. "Gloria!" She turned, her face registering a flicker of surprise before she masked it with a smile. "Michael, what are you doing here?" I forced a casual grin. "Just thought I'd grab a coffee, maybe talk." She hesitated, then nodded, seeming unsure of how to handle this unexpected encounter. "Sure, okay." We went inside, ordered drinks, and sat down at a small table by the window. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at her phone. She was nervous, unsettled. "I've been thinking," I began, keeping my voice light, "about us, about everything that's happened." Gloria stiffened, her fingers tapping lightly on her coffee cup. "Michael, I didn't want this to happen. Things just got complicated." I nodded, leaning in a bit closer. "I get it, Gloria. I really do. I know you were looking for something more. Exciting, maybe. But I need you to know something." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What?" I took a deep breath, keeping my face earnest, sincere. "Brad's not who you think he is." Her expression changed, a flash of confusion crossing her features. "What do you mean?" "I've been doing some digging," I continued. "And it turns out Brad's got quite a history. He's been using people like this for years. He's got debts, connections to some pretty shady people. I think he's using you, Gloria, just like he tried to use me." Gloria's face paled. She tried to laugh it off, but it sounded hollow. "That's ridiculous, Michael. Brad wouldn't what?" I cut in, my voice firmer now. "Wouldn't lie? Wouldn't cheat? You think he's just with you out of love? He told me himself, Gloria. He's playing you." I watched her carefully, looking for any sign that my words were getting through. Her face tightened, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "I don't believe you," she muttered, but her voice lacked conviction. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. "Then maybe you'll believe this." I played the recording, letting her hear Brad's confession in his own words, his cold, calculating tone spilling out into the quiet cafe. I watched her face as the realization hit her, her eyes widening, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He's lying," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Is he?" I asked, leaning back, crossing my arms. "Or is he just showing you who he really is?" She sat there, stunned, tears welling up in her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I thought," she began, but her words trailed off. She looked lost, broken. I stood up, pushing my chair back. "Think about it, Gloria. Think about who you're dealing with. And think about what happens next." I left her there staring at the table, her hands shaking, her mind racing with doubt. I knew she'd confront Brad, that she'd start questioning everything. I was counting on it. Later that evening, I met Mike at a quiet bar on the edge of town. He was already there, nursing a drink, a satisfied grin on his face. "Got the word out to Brad's contacts," he said as I sat down. "They're not happy. A couple of them are already pulling out of deals." I nodded, feeling the tension ease slightly. "Good. Let's keep the pressure on him." Mike raised his glass. "To turning the tables," he said with a grin. I clinked my glass against his, but I knew this was just the beginning. Brad and Gloria were going to tear each other apart, and I'd be there to watch it happen. The next day, I could feel the shift in the air. Gloria had been quieter than usual, moving around the house like a ghost. She looked distracted, her eyes red like she'd been crying. I knew she had listened to the recording over and over, and it was starting to sink in. She didn't confront me directly, but I could tell she was on edge, like a live wire, ready to snap. I decided to stoke the fire a bit more. I left a few printed copies of Brad's emails and text messages scattered around the house. In the kitchen drawer, under the couch cushions, even tucked into her purse. Each time she found one, she'd look at me, her eyes wide and furious, but I'd just shrug and smile innocently. I wanted her to feel like the walls were closing in. That afternoon she finally cracked. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, when she stormed in, waving one of the papers in my face. "What the hell is this, Michael?" she shouted, her voice strained, a mix of anger and desperation. I looked up slowly, keeping my expression calm. Looks like a love letter from your dear Brad, I replied coolly. Romantic, isn't it? Stop playing games, she snapped, her hands trembling. Why are you doing this? What do you want? I leaned back in my chair, studying her. I want you to see the truth, Gloria. I want you to know who you're really dealing with. She scoffed, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. You're just trying to turn me against him, make me doubt him. Maybe, I cut in, but think about it. If Brad really loved you, why would he be lying to you? Why would he be hiding things? Why would he say what he did on that recording? Gloria's face twisted in frustration. I don't know. Maybe he's just trying to protect me. I laughed, a harsh sound that made her flinch. Protect you from what? From the truth? Open your eyes, Gloria. He's been playing you from the start. She stared at me, her face crumpling. For a moment I thought she might cry, but then her expression hardened. I'm going to talk to him, she declared, her voice filled with a desperate determination. I'm going to ask him myself. I shrugged. Go ahead, ask him, see what he says. I watched her storm out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I knew she was heading straight to Brad, and I couldn't wait to see how this would play out. I followed her discreetly, keeping a safe distance. She drove fast, her car weaving through the afternoon traffic with a frantic energy. I could almost see the thoughts spinning in her head, the doubt and fear battling against her loyalty to Brad. She was heading to his place, just as I'd hoped. When she pulled up outside Brad's apartment building, I parked a few cars back, slipping out of sight. She jumped out of the car, practically running to the entrance, and I slipped out behind her, moving quietly. I found a spot where I could see them without being seen, hiding behind a corner of the building, close enough to hear. She banged on his door, her fists pounding with urgency. Brad, open up, she yelled, her voice shaky. I could hear movement inside, a chair scraping against the floor, and then the door creaked open. Brad stood there, looking disheveled, his hair tousled, his shirt half-buttoned. Gloria? What the hell? She shoved past him, storming inside. I need to know the truth, Brad, she demanded, her voice breaking. I heard what you said on that recording. Is it true? Are you using me? Brad's face darkened. Michael's been feeding you lies, Gloria. Don't you see? He's trying to turn you against me. Gloria's hands clenched into fists. Then explain the recording. Explain why you said those things. Brad hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to find a way out. I was angry, okay? He said finally, his tone defensive. I said things I didn't mean. I was just trying to rile him up. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, Brad, I know you. I've seen you lie to people before, but I never thought you'd lie to me. I thought we were in this together. Brad stepped closer, his voice softening. We are, Gloria, we are, but you need to trust me. Michael is trying to destroy us. Don't let him. But I could see in Gloria's face that the damage had been done. The doubt had taken root, and it was spreading fast. I don't know who to trust anymore, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know what to believe. Brad reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away, stepping back, her face full of fear and uncertainty. I need time, she muttered. I need to think. She turned and hurried out of the apartment, brushing past me without even noticing I was there. I watched as she climbed back into her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her face a mask of confusion. I waited a few minutes, then followed her as she drove away, heading back to our house. When I got home, Gloria was sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and puffy. I went to see him, she said quietly. I know, I replied, sitting down across from her. What did he say? She shook her head slowly. He tried to deny it, tried to turn it around on you. But I don't know, Michael. I think you were right. I leaned in, my expression serious. He's been playing you, Gloria, just like he played me, and now it's time for us to play him. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? We're going to make him think you're still on his side, I explained. Make him think he's won you over, that you're still loyal, and when he least expects it, we'll take him down. Gloria's eyes widened, a mix of fear and excitement crossing her face. You mean, together? I nodded. Together. You and me, Gloria. For once we're on the same side. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly nodded. All right, Michael. I'm in. I smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The plan was working perfectly. Brad wouldn't know what hit him, and neither would Gloria when this was all over. The tension in the cabin was so thick I could taste it. Gloria stood by the window, nervously twisting her hands together, waiting for Brad to show up. She had been playing her role well, pretending to want to run away with him, to leave everything behind. I'd been watching her carefully these last few days, trying to read her every move, every flicker of emotion on her face. I had to be sure she was on my side, at least for now. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat echoing in my ears. This was it, the end game. I had everything lined up, and now it was just a matter of execution. Then finally, I saw the headlights of Brad's car cutting through the fading light. He parked just outside the cabin, stepping out cautiously, a wary look on his face. Even from a distance I could see the tension in his posture, the way his hand hovered near his jacket pocket, where I knew he had a gun. Gloria took a deep breath, throwing me a quick, nervous glance before stepping outside to greet him. I followed close behind, staying just inside the door, hidden in the shadows. "Brad!" she called out, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "I'm so glad you came. We need to leave tonight. He's getting dangerous." Brad looked around, his eyes narrowed, clearly suspicious. "Where is he?" he asked, his voice low. Gloria shook her head. "He's not here. I left while he was out. I couldn't take it anymore. I want to be with you, Brad. I want to leave this place, leave him. But we have to go now." Brad hesitated, glancing around once more. I could see he was torn, not sure whether to believe her or not. But then he nodded, relaxing just a little. "All right, let's get out of here," he said, moving closer to her. "We've wasted enough time." That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows, my footsteps heavy on the wooden porch. "You're not going anywhere, Brad," I said, my voice steady. Brad spun around, his eyes widening. He immediately reached for the gun in his pocket, but I was faster. I drew my own gun, aiming it squarely at his chest. "Drop it," I ordered. He paused, sizing me up, then slowly pulled his hand away from his pocket. "What's your plan, Michael? Shoot me and go to prison, or let the cops take me and watch me walk free?" I smirked, feeling the tension in the air tighten. "I've got everything I need to make sure you go down, Brad. The cops are already on their way, and they've got enough evidence to put you away for a long time." Brad's face twisted into a sneer. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I replied calmly, never lowering my gun. "We've been playing your game, Brad. Now you're going to play mine." For a moment everything was still, and I could feel Gloria's eyes on me, waiting, her breath shallow and quick. But then something shifted in Brad's expression, a flicker of something I didn't recognize. And then, without warning, he lunged at Gloria, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her close, yanking her in front of him as a human shield. "You think you're so clever, Michael," he hissed, pressing his gun to Gloria's temple. "But you're not. I'm getting out of here, and she's coming with me." Gloria gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "Brad, please, don't do this," she whimpered, struggling against his grip. "Shut up," Brad snarled, tightening his hold on her. "We're leaving, now, or I swear I'll blow her brains out." I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me, my hands gripping the gun tighter. Brad, let her go, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm. This doesn't have to end like this. Brad laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Oh, but it does, Michael. You've pushed too hard. Now everyone pays. I could see Gloria's eyes darting around, searching for an escape. And then, in a sudden, desperate move, she stomped on Brad's foot, elbowing him in the ribs with all her strength. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. But then it happened. A deafening crack split the air. Brad's gun fired. I watched in horror as Gloria staggered, clutching her side, blood blooming across her shirt. She collapsed to the ground with a cry of pain. "Gloria!" I shouted, rushing forward, but Brad swung his gun toward me. I ducked, firing a shot that grazed his arm. He screamed, dropping his weapon, clutching his wound as he stumbled back. I ignored him, dropping to my knees beside Gloria. Her face was pale, her breaths coming in short, painful gasps. "Michael, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I pressed my hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, Gloria," I urged, panic rising in my chest. "Stay with me. Help is on the way." Brad, still cradling his wounded arm, glared at me. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think this is over?" I turned to face him, my voice cold and steady. "You're done, Brad. The police will be here any second. It's over for you." He sneered, but before he could say another word, the sound of sirens filled the air. Blue and red lights flashed through the trees as police cars pulled up to the cabin. Brad's face twisted with rage and desperation. "You'll regret this, Michael," he shouted, but he knew it was over. The officers rushed forward, guns drawn, ordering Brad to the ground. He dropped to his knees, his face contorted with fury as they cuffed him. I turned back to Gloria, who was slipping in and out of consciousness, her hand weakly gripping mine. The paramedics arrived moments later, pushing me aside as they tended to her. I watched them work, my heart pounding, a sick feeling settling in my stomach. I had won, but at what cost? Gloria was bleeding out before my eyes, her life hanging by a thread. "Michael," she whispered, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. I didn't mean for any of this." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "Just hang on, okay? Don't leave me now." Her eyes closed again, and I felt a rush of dread. The paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher, moving quickly toward the ambulance. I watched, helpless, as they loaded her inside, the doors slamming shut behind them. I stood there, the flashing lights illuminating the dark woods around me, the reality of it all crashing down. Brad was in custody, but Gloria's fate was uncertain. I had played my hand, made my move, but the ending wasn't what I had expected. I had set out to reclaim my life, to take control of the chaos Brad and Gloria had unleashed. But now, as the ambulance sped away into the night, I realized I was left with a hollow victory and a future filled with uncertainty. This wasn't the end I had planned, and as I stood there alone, I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, the cost had been too high.